The big question today, in fact, the title of this video could be called the liquidity trap with allocated net assets. And just to make sure we're clear on the jargon, the word liquidity in business, and at least in English, means how easily is the assets you have, how easily can they be converted to cash? How quickly can you get your hands on cash? So the highest liquid thing you have is the bank account, and probably the lowest is your fixed assets. So it's hard to get cash out of your fixed assets, but if you may have a long-term notes or receivables with conferences or receivables with schools that are hard to collect any cash on. So a liquid asset is one that is easily used to pay bills and to take new initiatives with and so forth. Well, so the liquidity trap, let's just go right to the point here. You could see here that we have an allocated net asset called Evangelism Big Cities, and that has 682,155. To the beginner in church finance, you say, oh, well, that's what we have to do evangelism in big cities. And that's intuitively correct, it's logical, but it's just not true. And that's the point of this video. How much of that 682, 155 can we spend on evangelism in big cities? Can we vote now to have a big project that uses up that whole 682, 155? And that is what we are looking at. To show you the relationship between liquidity and allocated, let's take one little peek at the policy, the GC working policy relating to allocated net assets. So, right in the heart of the church's policy on liquidity is its main policy on allocations. And there it says excess working capital at the end of the year may be transferred to allocated funds for specific purposes. So the idea is you have excess working capital before you allocate. If you don't have the working capital, then you cannot adequate working capital to cover your allocation, then you're basically doing a self-delusional act of allocating funds that you don't have. And so the policy is explicit with that. Well, it's one thing to say you shouldn't allocate unless you have the liquidity and the working capital to support the allocation. But what happens when you lose that working capital and you already have the allocation? And so that's sort of the challenge we have here is in theory, at least, when they set up this allocated for evangelism of big cities, they had the working capital. What happens when you then lose the working capital, but you still have the allocation sitting there? And so all of this interplay between allocated and working capital and liquidity is the point of this video. So to make things a little bit simpler for us, I have prepared a little demonstration that is just a simple demonstration to show you this problem. And so here on the left, we have a statement of financial position, the balance sheet, a simplified one, so you can see it clearly. And then on the right, we have a statement of net assets. So let's just look at the financial condition, the financial position of this organization. They have 100,000 in cash. They have loans to conferences of 50,000, and that is classified here in my presentation as a current asset. It's just a loan, okay? They've loaned them some money. The equipment of 300,000 with total assets of 450,000, current liabilities of 70, and our investment in plant, that's this 300,000 here, is a burden or a segmentation of net assets. The reason we set that aside like that is so we don't accidentally budget the spending of equipment. You can't budget that. And so we have at least a little bit more spendable allocated net assets of 50 and our unallocated of 30. Okay. And then our statement of net assets gives us more details. So let's look at that. We have unallocated of 30. You can see, just like I did in the previous video, show you there's linkage between these two. There's that. Then we have more details about our allocated. Our allocated total is 50,000, and we have 10,000 and 40,000. 10,000 has been allocated to evangelism for the Igbo of Southeast Nigeria, and 40,000 is allocated for big city evangelism. And then to balance it all out, we have 300,000 investment in plant, clearly set aside so we don't accidentally try to spend that 300,000. So a total of net assets of 380. And there you go. Can we spend 40,000 for big city evangelism? So it's the same question in a simplified case here. So can we vote to start evangelism for 40,000? Can we say, oh boy, we got 40,000, let's spend it on big city evangelism? Well, first off, we have 100,000 in cash and 70,000 in liabilities. So of this 100,000, 70,000 has got to go to pay off these bills. So that leaves us 30,000 in cash. So our quick answer is we have cash of 30,000 and an allocated of 40. Well, as a maximum, we can spend 30,000 for evangelism, but let's be practical. We can't spend all of our cash. We need cash just to handle the ebb and flow of our cash flows during the year, because during the year we bring in cash and we spend cash. Well, those are not perfectly balanced. In at least North America and almost every place I've ever been, you spend more. A conference spends more in the summertime for their summer camp and camp meetings, but they don't collect money until December. I think probably a fourth of donations come in December. Well, you have mismatch between the cash flows going out and coming in. And so for that reason, you've got to keep a little bit of working capital just to handle that, the ebb and flow, as I said. You also need a little bit of working capital for emergencies. So those things I just mentioned, that is the point in future presentations. But right now, let's just assume we don't have to worry about those. We still have 40,000 in our allocated and 30,000 of very liquid assets. So obviously right at the beginning, we can't spend that 40,000. The issue this thing hangs on is those loans to the conferences. Well, and only you would know, as in the organization, are those loans going to be collected? If they are just temporary loans that have happened because the conference hasn't sent over their tithe funds yet to this union, then you're probably okay. But if they are genuine loans that have been made to them and you don't know when they're going to get around to paying them or being able to pay them, then you can't. So you would have to evaluate the liquidity of this non-cash current asset to see, do you really have the cash to support voting 40,000 to be spent on renting buildings and sending out advertisements for this evangelistic meetings. They are going to use those things of renting a hall and publicity is going to use up real cash. And so you can't just pull it out of thin air. You've got 100 and you owe 70. That leaves you really 30. Well, how do you make up the difference? And one obvious place would be, well, you're going to be collecting this from the conferences, but if you're not, you shouldn't vote the 40,000. And so that's the liquidity problem. Just because we have net assets set aside over here, it does not mean that they are supported by genuine spendable assets, liquid assets. One way that I encourage, if you can figure out a way to do this, but one thing I think is important is to actually fund your allocated. Okay, so when you vote something to become an allocated net asset, when you vote it, you also take the cash out of your cash to support it and put it into an investment account or into another cash account, which is earmarked. And so you know you have the liquid assets to support your allocated net assets. So I hope this video has helped. And just a quick conclusion is that net assets, allocated net assets, are not necessarily supported with spendable cash to allow you to actually do what they're supposed to be doing. Only if you've taken the effort to make sure that you have the cash will it be there to support the allocation. And anything short of that would be a little bit deceptive. Our next set of videos is on the working capital statement and the liquidity statements that still are in the same ballpark of talking about how do we stand and our ability to pay our bills. So I hope you will stay tuned and watch that. So thanks a lot.